Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar of how to screen a tenant and lease like a pro. My name is Mariah, and I am Good Life Property Management's social media manager and also your co host today. And I'm so excited to jump into this webinar with you. A few house rules before we begin. We do ask for your full attention during today's presentation. Please silence your phone, silence your chats. We do encourage you to take pictures of any slides, take some screenshots if you find something helpful. And if for any reason you have to dismiss yourself early today, that's okay. We will be sending out a copy of our slide deck after our presentation today. We'll also be sending out, we actually will have a live Q&A at the end of our presentation. And if you have any questions or comments that come up during this presentation, feel free to slide them into the chat. And we want to make sure that we answer everything that you guys have before we dismiss you today. With that being said, I'm going to open the floor to our wonderful host, Adam.
Hey everybody, Adam Manley here from Good Life Property Management. Glad you could all make it. Thanks for joining today's webinar. A little bit about me. I am our sales manager here at Good Life Property Management. I'm also the first employee. I am a lifelong San Diegan, third generation. And what I do here is work with most of our clients on the onboarding process, working with new owners as they sign up and get started with Good Life. So thanks so much for that introduction. Mariah, I'm really looking forward to diving into this with everybody today.
Thank you, Adam. Before we get the ball rolling, let's jump into our agenda. What are we going to be covering today? We're going to be talking about how to find the perfect tenant, how to master the tenant screening process. We're going to look beyond the application and unveil secrets of effective tenant screening. We are going to learn how to understand and how to verify income for strong tenant selection. And we're going to cover some fair housing fundamentals and how to be able to rent with confidence while still staying compliant. Before we move forward, we have a little trivia question, icebreaker. If you're comfortable, feel free to give it your best shot. What is the cap on California rental application fees? Awesome. So as of December 2023, the total maximum screening fee you can charge is $62.02. Thank you guys for participating. We're all here to learn together, and yeah.
All right, guys, and without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. As you saw from the invite and from the title of today's webinar, we're going to be talking about tenant screening. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about are the actual requirements you should be considering when you're establishing your setting up your screening criteria for prospective tenants. So we've highlighted a couple of things on the board here, and I'll kind of run through them to give you a little bit of commentary on each one. Starting with the most basic, we need contact information, right? That includes names, phone numbers, email addresses. We allude to a couple other things you'll need, social security numbers, stuff like that. Current and previous addresses. These are going to be important when you're verifying previous rental references, which we'll touch on in a couple of slides. Things like employment history, proof of income, all things that you should be considering. Same thing with the driver's license or some type of photo ID to establish that you know who you're working with. A couple of additional tips to consider as well. Make sure you make the application fees refundable. And what we mean by that is if you have multiple applications, like if 2 or 3 people have applied for the property simultaneously, and you approve the first applicant without considering the second or third applicants, go ahead and make those fees refundable for those particular people. In addition, also make a copy of the credit or screening report available to the prospective renter. A lot of times they may be able to use this on another property, which may save them an application fee down the line. So, segueing a little bit into proof of income, what documents can you actually or should you actually require for this section of your application? So, the first and generally the easiest are pay stubs. everybody who has a normal job gets a pay stub. You know, you get paid weekly, bi-weekly. This is by far probably the easiest way to actually prove income. Some less common ways you could prove it is, let's say maybe the prospective renter is transferring to a new job, or maybe starting a new position at a new company. You can always consider a offer letter. Alternatively, if they have a job, sometimes within their own company, within HR department, they can print up some type of verification of employment, which would outline things like their salary details and stuff like that as well. Another really common example is like a tax return, like a W-2, for example. This will show, the whole year's worth of income in one nice document. Some other things you can consider are government assistance documents. If the tenant is participating in a program like Section 8, for example, they'll often get a supplemental housing voucher or some type of supplemental assistance in addition to their own income. You could require that as well. Bank statements are also something you could use. Let's say they're using something like rental income to prove that they can afford the property, or if they own their own business. Bank statements are something that you can also require and use to verify proof of income for a prospective renter. All right, guys. So, some key screening criteria here. These are all things that you should incorporate into your application as key things to screen for. The first is a just a good, hard, old-fashioned credit pull. You're going to want to review credit history, set some type of threshold for what you consider to be a good credit score, make that the bar. You'll also want to do a nationwide search for criminal and evictions. This is important because you obviously don't want to bring somebody in who has some type of troubled past, or has maybe broken the law, or been previously evicted from another tenant, or excuse me, from another landlord. So that's something very important you'll want to incorporate into your criteria. The third thing to consider is financial stability. And what do we mean by that when we say financial stability? What we're really looking for is how affordable the property is for the prospective renter. So consider establishing some type of threshold. For example, the applicant should make at least 2 times the rent in gross household income, or 2.5 or 3 times the rent, for example. Setting this threshold, you'll be able to see how affordable the property is for a prospective renter. The last thing you should consider are previous landlord references. These are imperative. You want to know how the previous tenant had left their landlord's property, if they, honored the terms and conditions of the lease, if they paid on time, those types of things. You should very strongly consider all four of these criteria when setting up your own rental application for your property. All right, so you have the criteria, you're getting ready to start. How do you ensure that this whole process is fair for a prospective renter? There are many things to consider, and you should really start with a basic compliance and understanding of the fair housing laws in your area. Ensure that the rental criteria that you've established meets all of the local, state, and federal fair housing laws. This is going to be a really important first step to making sure you stay out of a potential fair housing lawsuit. That segues very nicely into non-discriminatory practices. Make sure the criteria that you establish is objective, and you're not taking things like race, national origin, religion into consideration when you're processing these rental applications. One of the third fundamentals for ensuring fairness in your rental criteria is very transparent communication, meaning you need to let prospective owners know, or excuse me, prospective tenants know once they've submitted an application, if they're missing any of your key rental criteria, timeline updates, where you're at in the whole process. That's going to make sure it's really fair for everybody if you're communicating the same way with each prospective tenant. Make sure that the rental criteria is fair and objective, like we've touched on. When you're processing rental applications, it's very important that you process each one individually. Perform an individual assessment with the application you've received against the criteria that you've already established. Lastly, make sure that you're very clear going into this process what your standards are. Using the criteria we've established in the previous slides, set thresholds for credit score, previous rental references, rent to income ratio. Make sure those things are clear once you're going into this process so you know exactly what to screen against. All right, so you have a couple of good applications for the property. You're ready to approve somebody. How do you move forward from there? A couple of great steps and a timeline here that we wanted to kind of highlight. The first, as we mentioned in the previous slide, is just very prompt acceptance communication. The second you know that you're going to approve that applicant, you need to reach out to that prospective tenant immediately. The reason for that is the prospective tenant could be applying and looking at multiple properties. In fact, they probably are. So it's really important you strike while the iron is hot. You're also going to want to finalize the terms and conditions of the rental agreement. There's a couple of ways you could do that. What I would probably recommend is while you are accepting the prospective renter, send them an email letting them know they've been accepted and finalize all of the terms and conditions of the rental agreement in that email. That could look like, finalizing the term length of the lease. For example, if it's 12 months or 18 months, or 6 months, finalizing what funds are going to be due at the time of lease signing, first month's rent, security deposit, um, when they can get the keys, those types of things. So it's really important you finalize the rental terms in writing as you're accepting the prospective renter. The third thing you're going to want to do is set very clear timelines. As I mentioned a few moments ago, tenants are most likely looking at other properties simultaneously. So you want to give them a very clear timeline of acceptance. For example, you could give them 48 hours to sign the lease and handle the first couple of steps of the terms that you guys established together, 24 hours. Whatever the time limit is, make sure you establish it and it's very clear to the prospective renter how much time they have to move forward before you start processing or moving on to the next application. Lastly, move forward, get everything signed, send the paperwork out, start collecting those move in funds, do your move in walkthrough, arrange the day they can get keys. That's how you get this whole thing wrapped up. All right, so inevitably, you're going to have to deny an application, and there are a couple of legal and ethical considerations to go over. It's definitely more of an art than a science. No, nobody's good at it. It's awkward and uncomfortable every time, but some kind of great keys that can help you navigate this a little bit more successfully is, as we mentioned, make sure the criteria that you've established is very objective and clear. Make sure you're able to deny an application based on that criteria you've established. And it will also make it a lot clearer what people are meeting that threshold and what aren't. You don't have to take somebody's character into consideration, and you shouldn't, in fact. You should really use that criteria because it'll make it so much easier. You can very clearly see when someone is or isn't meeting. The second most important thing you're going to want to do is make sure you've meticulously documented everything throughout this entire process with each individual applicant. And what I would recommend is just keep a time log of everything you do. Once the application that you've received is completed and you have all of the required forms that you need, document that. Document when you start pulling their credit report, when you start calling their previous landlord references, when you communicate acceptance. All of this is going to be really important. If you do end up in a bad situation, you can go back and very clearly point to the process or the steps that you followed to get to the decision that you made. Lastly, prompt and courteous notification to the prospective renter. Be courteous when you let people down. Let them down easy. Don't tell them to kick rocks and go somewhere else. Be a professional about it and be prompt in that notification. Looking for a house is a really emotional process, and you don't want to keep people on the line. Let them down easy. Let them move on and potentially go find the right property for them. So, how do you do all of this? Where's a good place to start with all of this? Well, there are some great resources out there to individual rental property owners and consumers, and we've highlighted a couple of great ones on the screen for you guys. We invite you to check them all out, find the one that's going to work the best for your property and your particular situation. And lastly, before we wrap up, a couple of considerations to ask yourself. As you're going through this process, you may be wondering, hey, is this, when should I hire a manager? When does it make sense to, or should I? And we wanted to kind of highlight some things to think about as you're going through that. The first is, it makes the most sense to manage a property yourself for some of the reasons we've highlighted on the screen, like you live very close to the property. Maybe this is like an accessory dwelling unit or a granny flat you've built in your backyard. If it's, down the street from you or something like that. If you're recently retired and have a ton of time on your hands, or maybe looking for a new side hobby or project to get into. Um, Alternatively, if you have a great legal background too, a lot of being a property manager is understanding how to navigate the complexity of the rental laws and put them into practice in a fair way. And if you're coming from that background, that could give you a big leg up as a rental property owner. If this is a property with a very high level of emotional attachment, for example, this is the house you grew up in, or your grandparents' house that they've owned for 100 years. If there's a desire to be really involved in every aspect of owning this property and managing it as a rental, that would be a great opportunity to try it yourself as well. Of course, when you're deciding, should I take this job on or not, there's always the time factor. We've kind of highlighted some of the time involved in managing your own property as an individual landlord. So, definitely something you should take into consideration as well. And lastly, a couple other things here. So make sure that you really understand the laws. One of the benefits of using a property manager is that is our main job, is to limit liability for our clients. So hiring a property manager could insulate you a little bit more, and just make sure you're following the letter of the law a little bit more carefully. As things continue to get more and more complex here in California, that seems to be a bigger part of our job as property managers every day. If you're deciding to do this yourself, make sure that you have a very good book of business for contractors. And I would probably recommend that you have a couple of recommendations for each trade. A couple of different plumbers, couple of electricians, couple of handyman, couple of contractors. They all specialize in individual things. Some are better with other things than others. Some aren't going to be available when you need them. That's another benefit of working with a property manager, is a very robust referral network of contractors that they've built over many years. Um, Another thing to consider is how you can actually get time back. Um, when a tenant has direct access to the decision maker, they are, they know you're a phone call away, to make a long story short. And a property manager serving as a buffer can insulate you a little bit more from that. And more importantly, can really avoid you having to make on the spot decisions. Um, Something really to consider when hiring somebody is, how important is your time, and is it worth hiring somebody or doing it yourself? Better results. So, something we see very commonly with owners who are self-managing is generally below market rents. They don't want to rock the boat, or the tenant's been there forever. So, we see below market rents a lot. Um, we also see higher vacancy rates for a couple of reasons. Just, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, they may not have as robust of a network of contractors, so properties can spend more time in the actual repair stage. It may also be more difficult for an individual landlord to show a property to prospective renters, so that can increase the time that the place spends on market as well. Property managers generally have proven processes and systems in place to handle these types of routine procedures that come up with when owning a rental property. And as they're systematized, they're able to be executed a lot more efficiently at scale. Lastly, taxes. There are lots of things to consider with taxes, and I would very strongly recommend speaking with a licensed tax professional before going down this endeavor of becoming a landlord. It's important to understand the differences between being an active and a passive uh, rental property owner, and what that looks like versus being able to simply write the expense of a property manager off. And it's going to really depend on your individual situation. So it makes sense to speak to someone to understand what those differences look like and what may be better for you from a tax perspective. And lastly, guys, this is a kind of a fun slide to close us out. One of the most important things when it comes to being a landlord is just coming in this with the right mindset. And what we mean by that is, first and foremost, the tenant is your customer. You should not be actively working against your customer. They uh, are very easy to be displeased and go and voice their opinion online. It's important that you treat them like a customer, just like if you owned an ice cream shop and somebody was coming in to buy something from you. When you have this mindset and you treat the tenant like a customer, this absolute miracle happens and the property becomes their home. They stay longer, they treat it with respect, and they love living there. And that's really the home run of rental property ownership, is creating that dynamic. It starts with mindset and it starts with seeing your tenant as the customer. We've highlighted a couple of different ways you can do that on the screen there, and this is probably the cornerstone to being a successful landlord. When you are actively working against your customer, it just never results in a great experience for you, for your tenants, and for future tenants. So, kind of a lighthearted slide to close this out, and just something you should really consider. It's going to please the real estate gods, and it's going to make you a successful rental property owner. I think you're on mute, Mariah.
Sorry about that. Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam. I had seen a couple screenshots happening during the presentation, which is always a good sign. I don't see any questions coming up yet. We'll give it a few minutes. If you have any questions for Adam regarding the presentation or just regarding landlording in general, please feel free to shoot them in.
I see some activity in the chat, so let's give it a minute, Mariah.
Mhm. Beth is asking, are you familiar with the new pet rent?
Beth, I'm not familiar. Can you elaborate a little bit more on your question? Hey, Kevin, absolutely. Our pleasure. Glad it was informative.
I wonder if Beth may be talking about AB 2216. Bryce had mentioned this during one of our meetings that there's a new law that could be being passed about not being able to ask for security deposits or pet rent anymore. So, from Beth, with the new law going into effect about security deposits not being more than rent, we are not able to charge a specific pet deposit. So, we are now doing pet rent. Didn't know if property management companies can retain the monies or if it has been released to the owner.
Got it. Great question, Beth. So, just to unpack that a little bit, yes, there's a new law that's coming into effect in July that is going to prohibit rental property owners, property managers from charging more a security deposit that is more than 1 month's rent. It looks like a couple of landlords and other people are kind of segueing into pet rent and charging that in lieu of a increased security deposit or a quote unquote pet deposit. And it sounds like are you asking, can property managers charge that separately from the rent, or is it something owners retain? So here at Good Life, if you had an existing arrangement with your tenant, um, that's something we would honor, and I imagine most property managers would as well. We have a separate pet program where we charge the tenants a separate fee from the rent, and in return offer a $3,500 quote unquote pet deposit that can be used for damages. Every property manager is going to have their own kind of arrangement with regards to pets, but most will honor the arrangement that you currently have with your existing tenant. So I hope that answers your question, Beth. I do know that there was a piece of legislation that was proposed in the legislature that was specifically regarding pet rent and basically forcing landlords to accept, but I'm not sure if that has actually passed yet. But we'll certainly keep our eye on that and keep you guys posted there.
Thank you, Adam. Kevin is asking, how long from start to finish does it typically take to get a tenant into your home, considering all of the paperwork, cleaning, walkthroughs, etc.? Thanks, and go Chargers.
Yes, go Chargers and go Padres as the baseball season officially is underway here in San Diego and throughout the world as well. That's a great question, Kevin. I generally tell prospective owners to budget for about 1 month of total vacancy. That kind of breaks down as follows. Once you move out of the property, it can take between 1 to 2 weeks to get the property cleaned up, painted, do any repairs, clean the carpets, that kind of a thing. And obviously, if your place needs less work, it'll take less time. If there's a, big remodel that needs to happen, could take slightly longer. And then right now, we are seeing properly priced properties renting in that 2 to 3 week time frame. So it chalks out to about 1 month of total vacancy from the time you move out of your property to the time we have a signed lease with a new prospective renter.
Thank you, Adam. Fang is asking, how is the rental market right now? Can you give us an update, Adam?
Yeah, great question, Fang. So the rental market is still really strong here in San Diego. There's kind of a couple of dynamics at play, but the main one is just supply and demand. San Diego, there's nowhere left to build here. It's an incredibly desirable city. So strictly through the supply and demand lens, it's still a great time to be a rental property owner. We have seen rents soften, slightly from last year during kind of the end of COVID craze. But all in all, we're still seeing very consistently short vacancy periods. Tenants staying, on average, close to 3 years. Very reliable tenant bases here in San Diego. So the rental market, in my opinion, is great. And I would encourage anyone with a rental property to, not stay on the sidelines, jump in. It's a great time to put your place in the market.
Thank you, Adam. I think that ties it up for new questions. Beth says, thank you, Adam and the team. Great information. You're so welcome, Beth. We're so happy to have you here today. Let's go ahead and wrap up if there's nothing else here.
All right, guys. Well, that's all she wrote from us here at Good Life. We really appreciate everyone stopping by, and glad to see that the information was informative. We're really looking forward to bringing more of these to you guys too. So subscribe to all of our socials. Stay tuned for more just like this. If you have any other questions, whether it's about the rental market or an individual situation with your property, I've included all my contact info there. Do not hesitate to reach out to me anytime. I am always here to consult and provide advice and make you the most successful rental property owner you can be. Thanks so much, guys.
Yes, and Adam, thank you for hosting us today. On the next slide, we've got some other resources and links that will lead you to more of our free landlord resources. We encourage you guys to stay up to date with us. As Adam had mentioned, we've got more webinars coming up in the future, and we would love to see you there. But thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today.